Welcome to Adventure Stories Audio. Before listening to the story, please give the channel a like and subscribe. It's time for the journey to begin. I have never allowed my son to call me Mom, and even with my husband, we always address each other formally. Both father and son feel that I know my own identity and think that I will never be comparable to the woman who abandoned them, but only I know that I do not belong to this world. My name is Olivia Taylor, who was brought here by the system 5 years ago. As long as I stayed with him for that time, I could revive my husband and son in the real world. Now, the 5-year period has ended, and his ex-wife, Mary Harris, has returned. Our goals are now the same, to completely separate from each other and never meet again. Before leaving, the system gave me 7 days to say my goodbyes. So, in these final 7 days, I've become the ideal model in their eyes. He brought Mary home, and I no longer argued with him. My son called Mary mother. I also showed sympathy. At first, the father and son thought I had suddenly come to my senses and sneered. They considered it as if I had finally understood and done it earlier. Wouldn't everything be happy? But not long after, they looked at me with complicated expressions and asked, "Olivia, why aren't you angry anymore?" Hearing that, I smiled faintly. Isn't this exactly what you both are hoping for? Congratulations, the host has completed 5 years of companionship. Only 7 days left. Finally, you can leave this world and bring your family back to life in the real world. I finally heard the system's voice that I have been waiting for all these 5 years. I couldn't help but shed tears of joy. Over the past 5 years, I had dedicated myself to taking care of James Anderson, working hard to raise Henry Anderson. But as soon as Mary returned, their hearts turned to her. People mocked and ridiculed me, calling me a joke, but I didn't mind. Anyway, in 7 days, my real husband and son will be revived, and I can finally return home. Suddenly, a notification sound cut through the conversation between me and the system. I looked down and saw a message from James Anderson. At the headquarters, stomach pain, bring some medicine here. It was a very short message. I stood up and went to the window, pushing it open. Snowflakes as big as goose feathers were falling, and the cold hit me like a wave the moment I opened the door, making me shiver. Stepping outside in this weather was truly torturous, but in the end, I just sighed in resignation, closed the window, found a medicine, changed my clothes, and left the house. There was no other choice. The system's request could not be refused. I hurried to the designated room and was about to push open the door to enter when I suddenly heard the voice of James's friend from inside. "Is it true that Mary, whom you've been longing for, has returned? Are you going to divorce Olivia?" My movements froze. In the next moment, a deep voice, thick with the scent of alcohol, echoed, "No. Mary has a free-spirited nature and doesn't want to be bound. I love her. I just want her to be herself. Olivia knows how to take care of others, says and does what needs to be done. She's very suited to be a wife and mother." As his voice faded, the childish voice of 5-year-old Henry rang out simultaneously. "She's very suited to be a nanny, isn't she? All these years, she's taken good care of me and Dad, but no matter what she does, I only have one mom." As soon as the words were out, others immediately burst into laughter. "Henry is right, but does Olivia really say what she means and do what she says?" someone asked curiously. A moment later, another person chimed in. "Of course, Olivia's reputation for being a sycophant isn't just empty talk. If you don't believe it, just watch later." Saying this, the person turned back to look at James. "Can I borrow your watch for a bit, James?" James gave him a calm glance, seemingly aware of his intentions. However, he didn't say anything and slowly took off the watch, handing it over. Then splash. The person forcefully threw it, and the watch flew in a perfect arc before falling into the water outside the window. At that moment, someone walked toward me. Seeing that I was still standing outside the door, they asked, "Olivia, why aren't you coming in?" As they spoke, they reached out and pushed me inside the room. I didn't have time to react and was shoved in. Once I entered, the people who had been talking earlier showed no sign of guilt. On the contrary, they seemed even more excited. "Olivia, you're just in time. Mr. Anderson's watch fell into the pond earlier. Could you help retrieve it for him?" I looked at James in silence for a moment before speaking up, asking if he really wanted me to retrieve it. He kept his indifferent demeanor and nodded at me. In Henry's eyes, there was also a look of anticipation, as if he was waiting for the drama to unfold. He chimed in, "Aren't you always willing to do whatever we ask, ready to do anything for us?" I smirked, and after hearing his words, I shook my head. Not always, just 7 more days. James didn't understand what I said and furrowed his brows. "What did you say?" But I didn't bother looking at him again. I simply walked straight toward the window of the private room on the 2nd floor. The distance from the window to the surface of the lake wasn't very high, so I stepped onto a chair next to it, climbed through the window, and without any hesitation jumped into the lake. A splash echoed as I hit the water. The cold of the lake at this late hour was bone-chilling, and I shivered violently. I bit my lower lip to keep myself from sinking. At that moment, the laughter and chatter of the others reached my ears. "See? I told you, Olivia is completely infatuated with James and Henry. In this freezing winter, all it took was a single word, and she jumped into the water." Watching this, I even wish I had a wife who was so devoted. But just as James finished speaking, he cast a cold and sharp glance at the person who had just spoken. Deep down, he couldn't help recall the words from earlier. Only 7 days left. He let out a mocking chuckle and thought to himself, "It's probably just a tantrum." And so what if it is? Isn't it always the case that as soon as they say a single word, I'll jump into the water immediately? James recalled the first time we met. Everyone said, "Olivia, that's me, loves him so much that I even spoiled his child with someone else." And he thought the same, that from the moment we first met, I had clung to him. Over the years, some were after his money, others were after his looks, but no one loved him as purely as I did. Not even Mary. That's why he married me. 5 years have passed, and my attitude toward him and Henry has never changed. How can I possibly leave? He thought to himself as I stood there drenched at the door of the room, holding the watch I had just fished out of the lake. When I looked at James, my voice seemed a little weak as I said, "I found it." My lips were pale, clearly in a bad condition. Saying those words seemed to drain all the strength from me. The next moment, I suddenly lost consciousness. Before I completely blacked out, I vaguely saw James's expression change as he rushed toward me. Was it just an illusion? Since Mary turned back, James and Henry seemed to be doing everything they could to avoid any further involvement with me. How could they possibly care that I had fainted? When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying at home. The sounds of lively conversation and laughter continued to echo from the guest room. I stood up and pushed open the door. In the living room, there were only 3 people, James, Henry, and the one person who had a place in their hearts, Mary. They were sitting on the sofa, chatting happily. But as soon as I stepped out, they all stopped laughing. James glanced at me and casually said, "Mary will stay here for a while. Could you prepare a room for her?" Henry, the child who rarely listens and behaves well in front of me, was currently being cuddled by Mary, acting all spoiled and clingy. But when he looked at me, his words became quite rude. "This is my house, and this is my mom. It's only natural that she moves in here. Aunt Olivia won't object, right?" I pursed my lips. I had no right to object. James had never loved me. Before Mary returned, Henry still called me Mom. But since Mary came back, the boy began calling her Mom and me Aunt. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a nanny, so how could I have any right to interfere with their decisions? All right. I nodded calmly as if this were just a minor, everyday matter. Seeing me easily accept the idea of Mary moving in, James squinted, a bit surprised. Henry, however, didn't think much of it and continued to boss me around. "I'm hungry." "And go cook. Mom likes shrimp and tofu fish. You make it yourself." Because it was cold and my head still felt a bit dizzy, I was hesitant, but in the face of the child's orders and the system's requirements, I couldn't refuse. I reluctantly suppressed my discomfort and went into the kitchen. Without any help, I had to manage everything by myself. Through the kitchen's transparent door, I could still see James and Henry. The father and son were attentively taking care of Mary. One was feeding her fruit for dessert, while the other was pouring warm water into a cup for her, looking just like a happy family. In fact, there was nothing wrong. They were originally a family, and I was the outsider. I lowered my eyes, not looking anymore, and quietly handled the ingredients in my hands. There was no trace of sorrow in my heart. Soon, I would be reunited with my own family. 2 hours later, when I brought all the dishes to the table, James and Henry naturally led Mary to sit down. During the meal, Mary treated me like heir, constantly serving Henry, but each time she served him, the boy's expression changed. Finally, Henry couldn't hold back anymore and said, full of frustration, "I don't like this. I don't want to eat this. I've already told you, Mom. I'm sorry. I'll remember next time." Mary smiled and apologized. After failing with Henry, she turned to James and picked up a shrimp, about to place it in his bowl. He looked at the shrimp, his expression darkening. "I'm allergic to shrimp. Don't you remember?" Mary froze, her mood clearly affected by the series of actions. James and Henry's mood soured as well, and they both turned their attention to me, ignoring her feelings. I knew exactly what they meant. I took the plate and served each person their favorite dish, placing it in front of them. Only then did the father and son finally start eating contentedly. I quickly calculated the time and remembered the soup in the kitchen should be ready, so I stood up to go get it. As I turned to go into the kitchen, the door opened again. I looked back and realized it was Mary. The faint smile on her face made me frown. Just as I was about to ask what she was doing, she spoke first. "I'll bring it for you." "No need," I said, intending to refuse her as she walked straight towards a pot of soup. But in the blink of an eye, before I could turn to get the ladle, Mary had already reached the pot and extended her hand towards it. A scream of shock rang out, followed by the sound of the pot shattering. Hot soup splashed everywhere, some of it hitting Mary's hand, causing it to burn and turn red, her eyes welling up with pain. The noise was so loud that James and Henry were drawn to the scene, rushing in. Upon seeing Mary's pitiful appearance, they hurried over. "What happened?" "Maybe Miss Taylor doesn't like me very much, so she deliberately threw the soup on me," Mary replied with a hint of grievance in her voice. "That's right. Before, I abandoned the two of you, and Ms. Taylor stepped in to fulfill the role of wife and mother. Now that I'm back, I'm sure Miss Taylor has objections, but I never thought of competing with her for anything." A few exaggerated words immediately sent the two of them into a rage, not giving me a chance to explain. Their words were filled with disdain for me and sympathy for Mary. "What are you fighting for? I and my son were always meant to be with you. She has no right to interfere with you." Henry's voice was filled with rage as he echoed James's words. "You vicious woman. My father only married you to take care of me. Don't think for a second you're the mistress of the Ha family. Know your place and make sure there isn't a next time." James cast a cold glance at me, then carried Mary out of the room. Henry hurriedly followed behind him. No one paid attention to the direction in which the hot soup spilled. Mary only suffered a minor burn on the back of her hand, but my thigh was left with a large red burn. Perhaps, even if they had noticed, it wouldn't have mattered. After all, love and indifference are worlds apart. I watched the figures of the two of them leaving, and the words of James and Henry echoed in my mind. I laughed bitterly at myself. From the very beginning, I had been fully aware of my position. I was never their wife or mother. Sooner or later, I would leave, but after all those years of dedication, I thought that even if there was no love between us, at least there would be some affection. But now it seemed that everything was just a joke. However, it didn't matter. I would return soon enough. I limped back to my room and applied some medicine. Suddenly, the phone screen next to me lit up. I glanced at it and saw a video from Mary. "So what if you've married him?" she said. "Aren't they all surrounding me now? Even though I once abandoned them, the only person they love is still me." In the video, Mary's burned hand was carefully bandaged. James, who has a cleanliness obsession, was personally peeling a pomegranate for Mary and feeding it to her. Henry, the child who often made a fuss and claimed to hate practicing the piano, was now sitting at the piano, playing a piece to cheer her up happily. The scene of the three of them in the video appeared so harmonious and joyful. But in my heart, there was no stir at all. My family has never been just James and his son. Who they love and wish to be close to has never had anything to do with me. I turned off the video and looked around the room, which only had a few items that belonged to me. Silently, I began to clean up, waiting for the next morning to throw everything away. The next morning, when the father and son returned, they happened to see me throwing the things I had cleaned up into the trash. James furrowed his brows and looked at me. "What are you throwing away?" My movements paused, and finally, I lowered my head and replied vaguely, "Just some things I no longer need." Henry hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and looked into the trash can. It was filled with clothes and some of my belongings. He pursed his lips, his expression full of disdain, and sneered, "What a pile of useless garbage." Hearing his obvious mockery, I remained silent and said nothing. At that moment, James's phone rang. I faintly overheard that he had a contract to discuss. As expected, after ending the call, he looked at me and said, "I need to go out for a bit. Take good care of Henry." He left, and I had no choice but to look at Henry, who was standing next to me, his face full of disdain. Since Mary returned, he hadn't studied his lessons for days. Although his intelligence was very high and deserved the title of genius, even a genius couldn't perform well without proper focus. I was about to take him to the study room when Mary walked in, carrying a lot of snacks in her hands. She gently squatted down in front of Henry. "Henry, today I'm free, so I'll stay with you. Do you want to be with her or with me?" Henry quickly pushed me away and ran into Mary's arms, who was squatting at his level, his face filled with joy. "Of course, I want to be with Mom." Hearing his answer, Mary looked both satisfied and smug. She sneered at me and arrogantly pulled Henry into the living room. I couldn't stop them and could only watch as they made a mess. Within less than an hour, the entire floor was covered with snack wrappers. Then they both sat down on the floor playing video games, making the house even messier. If I let my guard down for even a moment, Mary would quickly pick up Henry and take him upstairs to play their little game of juggling. "Ms. Harris, this is the second floor. Juggling with a boy like that is very dangerous." "You should put Henry down," I said. "It's just juggling. What's so dangerous about it?" Mary said dismissively, completely ignoring my warning. Even Henry, who was in her arms, pouted and said, "Don't mind her, she's just jealous because I'm close to my mom." After saying that, she proudly tossed Henry a little higher, to the sound of his excited cheers. Tragedy struck quietly. Mary, overly smug, tossed the child too high. When he fell, she failed to catch him. Henry plummeted straight from the second floor, accompanied by a heavy thud. The boy didn't even have time to cry out in pain before lying unconscious in a pool of blood. Mary immediately froze, her face turning pale as she stood still, unable to move. I was startled by the sudden turn of events as well, but quickly regained my composure. I called an ambulance, and it arrived quickly. I rushed Henry to the hospital, and fortunately, the emergency procedure was successful, and his life was not in danger. When the boy was transferred to the VIP room, James arrived just in time. Seeing his son's head wrapped in bandages, his face became dark and solemn. Who did this? It was Olivia. She saw me and Henry getting along and became jealous, so she intentionally threw him down from the second floor, Mary said. I looked at her in disbelief, about to explain, when just then Henry woke up. James hurried over and asked, "Henry, how's your head? Does it still hurt? Tell me, who threw you down?" Hearing his father's question, the boy's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Just as Mary's heart was racing, unsure if Henry would tell the truth to James, the boy suddenly raised his hand and pointed directly at me. It was her. It was her who threw me down. Seeing Henry's finger pointed firmly at me, I froze in shock, as if struck by lightning. I was about to speak, but Henry, crying and asking for his mother, drowned out all my words. Mary quickly rushed over and hugged the boy. "Olivia, no matter how much you hate me, why target me like this? Why harm Henry? He's only 5 years old. How could you be so heartless?" The accusations from Mary, combined with Henry's perfect act, made it all seem so convincing. If I hadn't witnessed everything myself, if I weren't the one being falsely accused, I might have believed them too. But at that moment, all I felt was an icy chill in my heart. My lips were tightly pressed together as I stared at Henry. "Tell me clearly, who threw you from the second floor?" "Enough, Olivia." James stood up, glaring at me with eyes filled with fury. "At first, I married you because you were obedient. I never imagined you could be so cruel as to harm a 5-year-old child. If you have no intention of repenting, guards, take her to the detention room. Only release her once she admits her wrongdoing." James believed Mary's words and Henry's testimony, condemning me himself. His gaze towards me was filled with nothing but disgust. He no longer wanted to hear anything from me and ordered the guards to take me back to the villa and lock me in a dark room. "James, it's not me. I have claustrophobia. You can't lock me in here. Someone, please help me, let me out." In the pitch-black room, with no light, my face turned pale. I kept banging on the door, but after a whole night passed, my voice became hoarse from shouting, and no one came to help me. My cries grew weaker, and my knocks became feebler. My chest hurt intensely, torturing the last bit of consciousness I had left. Eventually, the awareness in my mind slowly faded away. Before I completely lost consciousness, I vaguely remembered my husband and child. They were still waiting for me in another world, waiting for our reunion. They were not like James and Henry. They were the ones I truly loved, my real family. Every night, my husband would gently lull me to sleep, and my young son, still small, would obediently lie beside me, patting my back with his little hand and saying, "Don't be afraid, Mom. I will protect you." Back then, I was truly happy. Unfortunately, a sudden car accident destroyed everything. They had become vegetative, and I was trapped in this world. I couldn't give up. Just a little longer, and I could leave here and reunite with them. The next day, with my face pale, I was finally released. James stood before me, silent for a while, then spoke. "I checked the cameras. It's true, it wasn't your fault, but Mary didn't do it intentionally either." Hearing him speak so lightly, as if wanting to brush everything off, I couldn't help but feel a bit amused. The moment he thought I had harmed the child, he immediately locked me in a cell. Yet, when he learned it was Mary, he just casually said it was unintentional. I wanted to laugh, and eventually I did. James furrowed his brow, his voice tinged with slight frustration. "What are you laughing about? Henry didn't intentionally frame you. He's asking for the dish you made. Go finish it and bring it to him." He spoke as if it were the most natural thing, as though no matter how much I suffered, as long as they needed something, I had to serve them respectfully. I really wanted to refuse, but in the end, I bit my lip and held back all my emotions, agreeing with only 5 days left. His furrowed brow hadn't relaxed, and upon hearing my last words, it furrowed even more. "What are you mumbling about every day?" he asked. When he questioned me, I wasn't flustered at all. I just brushed it off casually. Luckily, he was just asking aimlessly and didn't really care. Welcome to Adventure Stories Audio. Before listening to the story, please give the channel a like and subscribe. Now let's dive into the story. I quickly finished preparing the meal and took it to the hospital. When I arrived, Henry lifted his little head, the corners of his mouth curling up as if he had already predicted this. The next moment, he obediently turned to Mary, saying, "See, Mom? I told you she wouldn't be angry with me. She loves me so much. How could she blame me for such a small thing? So you don't need to blame yourself anymore." The two of them continued chatting, completely ignoring me standing beside them. I didn't mind and placed the food on the table before turning to leave. After that day, I stopped visiting Henry. Both he and James were busy nurturing their relationship with Mary, not paying any attention to me. I felt relieved and quietly continued cleaning up until, in the end, there would be nothing left in this house that belonged to me. Only then did I take a photo from my heart. In the picture, there were just 2 people, one adult and one child. The adult in the picture had deep, cold eyes, handsome, holding a lovely child who resembled him quite a lot. Both of them were looking at the camera, their eyes filled with love and tenderness. I gently ran my fingers over the photo, which had started to yellow. My gaze was full of longing as I murmured, "In 3 days, I'll be able to return to your side. I was lost in my own world until the photo in my hand was suddenly taken by a hand with distinct knuckles. I raised my head and saw that James, Henry, and Mary had somehow appeared behind me. What do you mean, return to who? James, at first puzzled by my words, instinctively looked down at the photo in my hand. When he saw the two people in the picture, his eyes ignited with rage. His hand clenched tightly around the photo as he stared at me. The man and the child in this photo, who are they? He asked. Henry, also curious, took the photo and looked at it. For some reason, when Henry saw the child in the picture, a wave of intense jealousy rose in his heart. Anger flared up instantly. Who are these people? What's your relationship with them? The boy's hand unconsciously tightened, causing the photo to fold, which startled me. I quickly grabbed the photo back from his hand. I looked at the crease on the photo, and a silent pang of heartache struck me. I opened my mouth to explain briefly, "This is an old friend of mine. We haven't been in touch for a long time." James furrowed his brows, not fully convinced. Mary then looked around at the empty house with some suspicion and asked, "Why is the house so empty?" Hearing this, Henry also glanced around and noticed something unusual. He frowned, displaying a demeanor similar to James's. "A few days ago, you threw some things out, but why is there so much missing now?" "It's best if you only threw out your own things," James reminded me for the second time. His expression suddenly changed, and without saying another word, he rushed toward the study. Not long after, the door was pushed open, and he came out of the study, his face filled with anger. He grabbed my hand tightly. "You lost the pearl necklace I left in the study." "The pearl necklace? Is it the one you left before?" "James, do you still have it?" Mary asked. I naturally knew how much James cherished that necklace. When Mary left, she took everything with her, and the only thing she left behind was that forgotten pearl necklace. From that moment on, the necklace became all he had to remember her by. Now, with it missing, James suddenly gripped my hand tightly, his expression cold. "Find it for me." I felt a surge of helplessness rising in my heart. I had never touched his things, but the intent in his eyes was crystal clear. He didn't believe me. "In this house, you're the only one who could have gone into my study. If it wasn't you, then who else?" "Olivia, I'm giving you 1 day to find it." I couldn't refuse James. With no other option, I had to go out and search. But after a while of rummaging, the trash bin outside the villa was empty. I asked the person in charge of cleaning and learned that the trash had already been taken to the landfill a long time ago. Reluctantly, I had no choice but to rush to the dump. Without caring about the filth, I spent the whole day and night rummaging through the trash but still couldn't find the pearl necklace. In the end, I had to return empty-handed. When I returned to the villa, exhausted, everyone was already asleep, except for James, who was reading reports in the living room. I approached and explained once again. I searched, but I couldn't find it. I really didn't lose it. The pearl necklace accidentally fell under the bookshelf. I forgot to tell you. It's no wonder you couldn't find it. His voice was flat, as if he didn't care about the matter. After a while, he started blaming me for being inefficient. I froze for a moment, closed my eyes, and said, "Didn't you ask me to find it? Whatever you say, I have to do it." What I meant was that I was bound by the system and couldn't refuse any request from the target. However, these words sounded different to James. He clearly misunderstood. His heart stirred slightly, and his gaze toward me shifted immediately. After thinking it through, he suddenly realized that over the years, I had never refused any of his requests. This was the first time he had met someone who loved him so much. Even when we got married, he said that in this lifetime, he only had one child, Henry, and would not let me get pregnant. I just obediently nodded in agreement. Looking back now, I can't say there wasn't a touch of emotion in my heart. When he looked at me, he rarely showed any compassion, but his gaze softened. "Go take a shower and get some rest," he said gently. I knew he had misunderstood, but I was too exhausted and had no energy left to explain. I turned around, went to take a shower, and went to bed. Perhaps because the whole day and night had been so tiring, as soon as my head hit the pillow, I fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I was woken up by the alarm I had set earlier. Seeing the congratulatory messages in my email from various platforms, I suddenly remembered that today was my birthday. The house was empty, and I didn't ask where the others had gone. I simply bought a cake for myself. This was my last birthday in this world, and even though I was alone, I had to celebrate it properly. I lit the candles, ready to make a wish, when the doorbell suddenly rang. The person standing outside was James's assistant. He didn't say much, just handed me a box. "This is the dress, mister. Ask me to give you. He wants you to meet him on the 5th floor for the dinner party." After saying that and handing me the box, the assistant left. I couldn't refuse, so I hurried back to my room to change into the dress and rushed to the address the assistant had given me. When I arrived, I realized it was a birthday party. At first, I thought James and Henry, father and son, had finally remembered that it was my birthday. I stood there in a bit of a daze, but in the next moment, I saw Mary happily approaching me, smiling brightly. "Miss Taylor, you finally made it." Right behind her were James and Henry, and as soon as they saw me, their expressions immediately changed. James's expression darkened, and Henry, slightly dissatisfied, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why did you call her here? I heard that today is also Miss Taylor S.'s birthday the same day as mine. It's too pitiful to spend the day alone, so I invited her to join us for some company," Mary said, giving me a sly glance, her eyes filled with a hint of smugness. She pointed to the long table in the center of the banquet hall, where numerous large and small gift boxes were displayed. "These are all gifts that James and Henry prepared for me. There are so many that I can't possibly accept them all. Miss Taylor, would you like to take a look? If there's anything you like, I can give it to you. It's sad to have a birthday without receiving gifts." Mary's boastful tone was all too clear. I gently shook my head and didn't respond to her. "There's no need. If it's a gift from Ms. Harris, then Ms. Harris should keep it." Seeing that I wasn't falling for her trick, Mary wasn't upset. She walked over to the multi-layered birthday cake and smiled at me. "If you don't want any gifts, then make a wish." Thinking about the wish, this time I didn't refuse. I folded my hands, closed my eyes, and silently made a wish in my heart, one that no one else knew about. From now on, I will never meet James and Henry again. After making my wish, Mary still had no intention of letting me off. She pretended to be curious and asked, "Ms. Taylor, what did you wish for? Why don't you say it?" Before I could open my mouth, Henry's confident voice rang out. "What else could it be? She always wishes for me and my father to be safe and happy. This year, it'll definitely be the same." James, standing next to him, said nothing, but from his gaze, I could clearly see that he thought the same. I had no intention of explaining, so I let them continue misunderstanding. It was easier that way, without the hassle. Mary smiled and handed me a glass of water. "It's quite a coincidence that our birthdays are on the same day. Let's toast, Miss Taylor. You surely wouldn't refuse, would you?" As soon as I heard her say that, James and Henry immediately surrounded me, their eyes full of caution, as if I were a wild beast that would cause trouble for Mary. I stayed silent for a moment, feeling a bit amused, and chuckled quietly. I raised my glass and clinked it with Mary. The birthday party was still ongoing. After the toast, someone else came over to offer more wine. Mary generously chatted with the guests, while James and Henry always stayed close to her, helping her avoid alcohol and bringing her sweet treats. Some people noticed me standing alone in the corner, and then looked back at the two of them who were surrounding Mary. Suddenly, there was a lot of gossip. "Mr. Anderson is so good to Miss Harris, not even caring about his own wife, always staying by Miss Harris's side. Who said Ms. Harris is Mr. Anderson's true love? If Miss Harris hadn't suddenly left back then, Olivia would never have become Mrs. Anderson. I say she should divorce soon to avoid making a scene at the end. Didn't you see who she married? She's the wife of the CEO. How could she possibly give that up?" The whispers were far from quiet, and even in the corner, I could hear every word clearly. After leaving James, I just smiled. There was no need for them to urge me. Soon enough, I would disappear from their lives, vanish from this world forever. At that moment, the banquet hall ahead suddenly became noisy. I stood up and realized that Mary had suddenly complained of a stomachache. James quickly called for the personal doctor. After a brief examination, the doctor hesitated before saying, "Sir, Ms. Harris's symptoms suggest poisoning. We must rush her to the hospital for a stomach pump immediately." Hearing this, James's face immediately turned pale with distress. He picked up Mary, his face ashen, and quickly left the banquet hall, leaving behind a cold command: "Find out who did this." With the incident involving the main person, the party could no longer continue. The guests hurriedly left, and I, too, returned to the original villa alone. I thought to myself that this had nothing to do with me and simply waited for the system to bring me back to the real world. Who would have thought that later in the evening, a few bodyguards would suddenly barge in and drag me in front of James and Olivia? James said, "I've already told you, as long as you behave, I won't touch your position. But time and again, you've gone after Mary. Such stubbornness, Olivia, you vile woman, you even dared to poison my mother." Suddenly being brought here, I could feel the anger of both the adult and the child directed squarely at me. From their words, I roughly understood the reason. They believed I was the one who poisoned Mary. "I didn't do it," I said angrily. "Besides, I'm about to leave this world. There's no reason for me to poison Mary. Even if I truly resented, how could I do it when they always hovered around her? How could I have had the opportunity to poison her?" But they ignored my defense entirely. James turned to look directly at Mary, his voice softening a little, carrying a tone of reassurance. "How do you want to deal with her? I won't cover for her, but since she's my wife, it's not appropriate to send her to the police station and embarrass me. Then give her to me for one day, and I'll make her confess," Mary said, looking at me as the bodyguards held me tight, a smug smile curling at the corner of her lips. I thought they would agree immediately, but to my surprise, they didn't respond. I looked up and saw the hesitation on James's face, while Henry also appeared to be uncertain. "Mom, what do you want to keep her for a day?" Upon meeting their gazes, Mary's eyes suddenly became red. "I wouldn't even dare to step on an ant. How could I do anything excessive to Miss Taylor? I just want to use my feelings to help Miss Taylor realize her mistake." Though she said that for some reason, James suddenly felt uneasy. However, in the end, perhaps because he found her reasoning convincing or simply didn't want her to suffer, he agreed, though he repeatedly emphasized that she must bring me back after one day. Even Henry hesitated, reluctant to leave. In the end, he couldn't help but give a cautious reminder: "Make sure to return her safely tomorrow, okay?" Mary smiled gently and reassured him, but as soon as the father and son left, her expression changed abruptly. She ordered someone to take me back to the Harris family villa. Once the large doors were shut, I could clearly see the malice in her eyes. Mary signaled to the bodyguards, who immediately understood her intent. They stepped forward, kicked me to the ground, and tied me up tightly with ropes. That kick was delivered with full force. I only felt a sharp, searing pain radiating through my back as I hit the ground. Before I could recover from the agony, Mary took the whip from the bodyguard's hand and lashed it across my body with immense force. In an instant, blood appeared. The stinging pain made me cry out involuntarily. Having witnessed both sides of Mary before, I naturally knew that her taking me away was not out of goodwill. But I hadn't expected her to act so quickly and mercilessly against me. Then came the second lash, the third, and the fourth, striking me in quick succession. She beat me like this without any concern about how difficult it might be to return me in one piece the next day. Lying in a pool of blood, I could no longer hold back and questioned her. Hearing my words, Mary remained unfazed. "Don't worry," she said with a smug tone. "As long as you don't disappear unexpectedly, even if I beat you to the brink of death, I'll still have an excuse to explain it away." Her voice was filled with triumph. Yet I suddenly smiled, knowing that soon I would vanish without a trace. Mary didn't notice my smile and continued to swing the whip tirelessly. The whip gradually became stained with blood, and her curses echoed in my ears. "You wretched woman, daring to compete with me for a man." By this point, my entire body was covered in blood, yet I still refused to beg for mercy. "Was it really you who poisoned yourself?" I questioned. "But didn't you say before that you wanted to leave and didn't need them anymore?" Hearing this, Mary let out a mocking laugh. Even if I don't want them, it doesn't mean it's your turn. Who knows what kind of tricks you used to make James refuse to divorce you? My mouth was filled with the salty, metallic taste of blood as I endured the pain. Her accusations rang in my ears, but they only struck me as absurd. James's refusal to divorce her was surely just to accommodate her free-spirited nature, wasn't it? She was the one who wanted to leave before, and now she was dissatisfied because I was by James's side. It was all her doing. Mary, unaware of my thoughts, vented her anger with even more fervor. Lash after lash, she seemed intent on beating me to death. It wasn't until the phone on the sofa rang, James calling, that her expression changed. Finally, she stopped the whipping and answered the call. On the other end of the line, the voice was brief and to the point, skipping any greetings and directly asking for Olivia to take the call. Her face stiffened, and with clear reluctance, she handed the phone to me. Her eyes glinted with malice as she silently mouthed the words, "Just try saying a single word, and I'll make sure you don't leave here alive." Did Mary do anything to you? James's rare concern left me silent for a long moment. Yet, I still chose not to accuse her. Instead, I weakly uttered 2 words into the phone. Nothing happened. I also heard a sigh of relief on the other end of the line. "I'll come and pick you up tonight," he said, followed by, "And me too." Just as the call was about to end, Henriette's tender voice chimed in from the background. I let out a bitter smile, wondering what had gotten into them today to suddenly show concern for me. Could they sense that I was about to leave? My silence seemed to make the breathing on the other end grow heavier, as if there was more to say. But before that could happen, Mary snatched the phone, hung up, and threw the whip back to the bodyguard. Her gaze turned even colder. "Just leave her with one breath left," she commanded. "James said he'd come to pick her up tonight, didn't he?" The bodyguard holding the whip hesitated, but Mary shot him a glare. "I'll go out now and find a way to stall them. You all can keep tormenting her until morning." With that, Mary left, but the torture didn't stop. The pain and the lashes consumed my entire consciousness. That night, as expected, I didn't get to see them because Mary made them break their promise. Until the faint light of dawn, the bodyguards took turns tormenting me. Finally, they stopped. By then, I had been beaten so severely that my skin was torn, my body covered in wounds, and I was almost unrecognizable, a bloodied figure that would horrify anyone at first glance. Outside the villa, the faint roar of a car engine could be heard, causing the bodyguard's expressions to shift dramatically. They hurriedly called for the servants, who dragged me into a room. The servants quickly changed my clothes and reapplied my makeup. Finally, they helped me onto the sofa before disappearing without a trace. Left alone in the villa, I suddenly saw a golden light hovering before my eyes. "Congratulations, host. The companion mission has been completed. Your real-life family has been revived. Would you like to leave this world immediately?" the light asked. Excitement surged within me, yet my face was devoid of any vitality. I simply lifted my head and asked the system, "Before I leave, can you do one thing for me?" The system's mechanical voice responded, "What would you like me to do, host?" I said, "Retrieve all the surveillance footage showing Mary framing and harming me over the past few days. Consider it my final gift to the father and son in this world." "Understood. Host, please prepare yourself. I'm about to send you home," the system replied. As the words faded, golden light enveloped me, and in an instant, I vanished without a trace. All that remained was a piece of surveillance footage lying silently on the sofa. The moment I vanished, the door opened, and James entered with Henry just behind him. Seeing the empty living room, an increasing sense of unease gripped him, as if something precious had slipped away beyond his grasp. Not finding the person he came to see, James frowned and turned to look at Mary, who was trailing behind him. "Where is Olivia?" he asked. She forced a stiff smile and gestured toward the sofa. "Isn't she sitting right there?" she said, initially meaning to claim that I was still seated. But when she turned to look, she saw the sofa was empty. Stunned for a brief moment, her gaze quickly turned icy as it swept toward the bodyguards. The sudden disappearance left the bodyguards alarmed as well. Panicked, they shook their heads and hurriedly explained to James, "Mr. Anderson, when we stepped out, Madam was indeed sitting on the sofa." "So where is she now?" he demanded. Seeing everyone stammering, unable to answer, he felt a surge of fury rise straight to his head and bellowed, "Well, don't just stand there. Go find her." The others could only stand there, filled with anguish and unable to speak. They couldn't tell James that they had been beating her all night. Given how severely injured she was, it should have been impossible for her to leave. And yet, to their dismay, not only was she no longer in the living room, but even after turning the entire villa upside down, they couldn't find a single trace of her. Henry didn't understand why he had been restless ever since leaving the Harris family villa with James the day before. It wasn't until that evening, when James made a phone call and heard her say nothing happened, that the boy finally felt at ease. He thought he would see her today, but upon arriving, he discovered she had disappeared. A sense of unease rose from the depths of his heart once again. He raised his head to look at Mary, his eyes unconsciously carrying a hint of reproach that even he wasn't aware of. "Didn't you promise to return her safely today, Mother?" Henriette's words carried an unmistakable tone of reproach. Mary's face turned pale as she instinctively looked to James for reassurance, only to find his gaze also tinged with blame. In an instant, a surge of grievance welled up within her. She hadn't expected them to question her because of Olivia. Outwardly, she maintained a composed expression, but inwardly, her resentment for Olivia deepened. They were supposed to be her husband and child, yet after only 5 years apart, they had found someone to replace her. She hadn't even wanted the divorce to begin with, but now with that woman merely gone for a moment, they were already criticizing her. "I really don't know. Haven't I been with the two of you since last night? How could I have done anything to Miss Taylor? Why are you looking at me like that?" In an instant, her eyes welled with tears. James and Henry immediately felt regretful. "Mary, I don't blame you. It's just that Olivia has suddenly disappeared, and we need to find her first," said James. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to blame you," Henry added. However, their apologies failed to soften Mary. She stormed toward the sofa, intending to sit down, but noticed a roll of surveillance tape lying there. Filled with doubt and confusion about its origin, she reached out to pick it up. Just then, James and his son, who had followed behind her, also saw the tape and quickly grabbed it. "What is this? A surveillance tape?" Both of them seemed very intrigued by the tape. For some reason, a voice in Mary's mind told her she couldn't let James and his son watch it. She instinctively reached out to grab it, but just then the pale-faced bodyguards returned, speaking in hushed tones. "Mr. Anderson, we've searched everywhere we could, but we still haven't found Madam." In an instant, the atmosphere grew heavy. Henry glanced at the tape in James's hand and suddenly spoke up. "Dad, could this be something Aunt left behind?" It suddenly dawned on James that no one knew where Olivia had gone, and the only clue seemed to be the surveillance tape. With this realization, his gaze shifted to the television opposite the sofa, and he casually instructed one of the bodyguards to play the tape. Before Mary could voice her objections, the bodyguard, trembling, stepped forward to take the tape and began operating the equipment. Everyone's eyes fixated on the screen, a palpable tension filling the room as they feared what might appear on it. The next moment, after the static sound of the tape started, a clear image appeared on the screen. The first footage shown was of the kitchen from the day Mary first moved into the Ha family home. The recording clearly captured her after being refused by Olivia, stubbornly picking up a pot of soup and deliberately letting it spill down her back. Later, when James and Henry rushed in, she pretended to be pitiful and claimed that Olivia had intentionally thrown the soup at her. The footage continued, showing the scene where she was allegedly poisoned during James's birthday party. The recording revealed her, after receiving a drink brought by a server, secretly pulling a packet of powder from her pocket and pouring its contents into a glass of wine. Later, after having her stomach pumped and regaining consciousness, she cried pitifully and accused Olivia of being the mastermind behind it all. The footage then showed what happened after James and Henry left the Harris family villa the previous day. Mary was seen smiling gently as she bid the father and son farewell, but the moment they were out of sight, her expression turned cold. She grabbed a leather whip and lashed it violently at Olivia. When James called to check on Olivia's condition, Mary issued threats to prevent her from seeking help. After ending the call, her face grew even more sinister as she ordered the bodyguards to continue the torture, instructing them to leave her with just one breath of life. She assured them she would find a way to stall the father and son. The expressions of the father and son shifted with each image on the screen. From initial shock and disbelief, Their faces turned to sorrow as they saw Olivia being tormented, and finally, to hatred toward Mary. Their darkened expression seemed almost ink-like, as the truth unraveled before them. All of it had been a lie. Mary had deceived them entirely. It was only now that James and Henry understood why Mary had suddenly sought them out last night, feigning pitifulness and promising never to leave them again. "Is this what you meant when you said you wouldn't harm Olivia? Mother, didn't you promise to return Aunt Olivia safely today?" This time, the voices of James and Henry were filled with nothing but detachment and questioning. From the very first scene on the tape, Mary's face had already begun to show panic. Her small face turned pale as she tried to comprehend how Olivia, despite being beaten to such a state, had still managed to escape. What's more, before disappearing, she had left behind the surveillance footage from an unknown source, a final blow that Mary could have never anticipated. Mary's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the ground, shaking her head repeatedly. Even now, she didn't forget to defend herself. "James, Henry, you have to believe me. I didn't make these videos. It must be that wretched Olivia fabricating them to frame me. You both know me. I wouldn't even dare to step on an ant, so how could I possibly do something like this?" In her frantic attempts to justify herself, she completely forgot the image she had been trying to maintain in front of James and Henry. How could she let such crude words like wretched slip out in their presence? James's gaze was as heavy as ink. Gripping her chin tightly, he let out a cold laugh. "It's my mistake for trusting you, the woman who heartlessly abandoned me and Henry 5 years ago. I even believed your words and punished Olivia, not realizing that you were the truly cruel one all along. Mary, I misjudged you. But people must always take responsibility for their mistakes, don't they? Tell me, how should I punish you?" Seeing the hatred in his eyes, Mary panicked and desperately searched for someone to plead with. Her gaze finally landed on Henry. She sought his help, hoping he would intercede on her behalf. "Henry, quickly beg your father for me. I know I was wrong. You both can't treat me this way," she pleaded. Henry suddenly reached out and tugged at James's sleeve. Noticing this, a glimmer of hope and smug satisfaction flashed in her eyes. See? What was the point of treating Henry well? It didn't matter, because with just a single word from her, he would still beg for her. James turned to look at Henry, his face barely concealing restrained anger. He clearly expected the boy to plead on Mary's behalf. However, the boy's next words surprised everyone. "Dad, you can punish her anytime. The urgent thing now is to find Mom." For the first time since Mary had returned, Henry referred to Olivia as Mom. Unfortunately, she could no longer hear it and had long stopped hoping for such acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Mary, upon hearing the shift in how he addressed her, felt the glimmer of hope she had just begun to foster extinguish instantly. She was filled with disbelief. How could they abandon her so easily, just because of a surveillance video from an unknown source? "James, Henry," she screamed, but the father and son didn't look back as they left. They only ordered a few bodyguards to tie up Mary and the people who had beaten Olivia, taking them to the Hoff family villa to be imprisoned. With the remaining bodyguards, they began to search the Harris family villa, gradually expanding the search area. James scoured the entire Harris family estate, the surrounding villas, and even across the country, but there was no trace of Olivia. Despite this, both James and Henry never gave up on looking for her. They reported the case to the police and issued a wanted notice, but 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, and 3 years passed without any results. In City B's prison, separated by a special layer of glass, Mary sat across from James and Henry. She wore prison stripes, her face haggard, her exposed skin crisscrossed with scars. On her face was a particularly hideous and terrifying burned scar. On the other side of the glass, James remained cold and unmoved by her current wretched state. After all, those scars were all connected to him in one way or another. 3 years ago, after discovering everything Mary had done, he brought her back to the villa and made her pay for all the suffering she had inflicted on Olivia. Starting with a bowl of hot soup, he personally boiled a kettle of water and poured it over the right side of her face. Despite her cries and pleas, he remained unmoved. For every lash she had delivered to Olivia, he returned the same, striking her until she screamed in agony, teetering on the edge of life and death. If not for the search for Olivia and involving the police, which exposed a series of events, Mary's deeds would have remained hidden. Once revealed, she was scorned by countless people and sent to prison. Perhaps she would have endured even more suffering at his hands, but even in prison, her days were far from better. She was ridiculed as a shameless third person in a relationship, ostracized by her fellow inmates, frequently beaten, and often denied food. They had long severed ties, making it impossible to have a civil conversation. At this point, both James and Henry displayed visible impatience. "Didn't you say you knew where Olivia was?" they asked. The father and son hadn't wanted to come here at all. After all, if outsiders couldn't find her in 3 years, how could someone in prison have any information? Unless, of course, she had cruelly killed Olivia and hidden the body back then. But if that were truly the case, why would she wait 3 years to tell them now? Despite their doubts, they wouldn't let even the slimmest hope slip away. Mary's deformed smile, stiffened by the burns, looked grotesque, something that might haunt a faint-hearted person with nightmares. Yet even at just 8 years old, Henriette's expression remained unchanged at the sight. Seemingly unaware of how terrifying she appeared, she spoke in a raspy voice. "That's right, I know she's no longer in this world. She's returned to her own world. Funny, isn't it? You've tormented me, wasted so much effort and resources searching for her, but the truth is, she never even loved either of you." James and Henry were initially stunned by her words, but their next reaction was disbelief. What nonsense about not being in this world anymore? What drivel about never having loved them? It was all gibberish. Their expressions, eerily similar, reflected their shared suspicion that Mary was deliberately saying these things to provoke them as revenge for the torment they had inflicted on her earlier. Their faces darkened immediately as they stood up, ready to leave. Once again, she called out to stop them. "Don't you want to know who the 2 people in the photo Olivia was holding are?" Her raspy voice, distorted as it traveled through the phone casually placed on the table, was somewhat difficult to hear clearly. Yet it froze James and Henry in their tracks. Buried memories suddenly resurfaced, flipping through their minds like pages in a book, finally stopping at a photo they had seen only once. They both clearly recalled the slightly yellowed old photograph of 2 people, one adult and one child, whose eyes radiated love and closeness. And amidst it all, there was also a trace of wistfulness in her expression. At that time, she murmured that she would return to them in 3 days, her fingers gently caressing the photograph. When they applied a bit more force, she sorrowfully snatched the photo back. No matter how one looked at it, their relationship couldn't be that of old friends who had lost touch. Seeing their steps falter, Mary's eyes gleamed with a crazed delight. She had endured torment for 3 years. What right did they have to live comfortably and happily? "These past few days, I've had a dream of another world. That world is different from ours. In that world, there is no Anderson family, no James, and no Henry. But in that world, there is Olivia." She was holding the hands of 2 people, the 2 people in the photo. One called her wife, and the other called her mother. I could see how her emotions with them were different from how she was with you. There, her joy was genuine. Her love for them was real. It wasn't like with you two, where she was obedient but lived like a puppet. I saw a sphere of golden light, which Olivia called the system. Occasionally, she would speak with it. That's when I learned the truth. Olivia wasn't from this world. She only stayed with you because, in her world, her husband and child had been in a traffic accident and fallen into a vegetative state. She accepted a mission from the system to accompany you for 5 years. One of the mission requirements was to obey your every command. She never loved you. In her eyes, you were nothing more than the targets of her mission. The more Mary spoke, the more triumphant she became. Yet with every word, James and Henriette's faces grew paler, until Henriette's complexion turned ashen, his eyes filled with bewilderment and helplessness. "You are lying," he choked out, his voice trembling with just 3 words. Struggling to refute her, to deny her accusations, he looked up at James, tears brimming in his eyes. "Dad, she's lying to us, right? How could Mom not love us? How could this be true? For 5 years, she always complied with their wishes, no matter how unreasonable their demands were. Olivia would try her best to fulfill them. Even when they misunderstood her, she never needed an apology. The moment they expressed a desire for a meal, she would rush to cook and serve it to them, presenting it directly at their table. "Oh, that's right," as Mary said, claiming it was all due to the system's requirements. Henry hesitated for a long time before realizing that, beyond accompanying them and obeying their every command, there seemed to be no evidence to prove that Olivia actually loved him. Meanwhile, James remained silent for a while, but internally, her words stirred a storm within him. He suddenly recalled how Olivia used to murmur something about 7 days, 5 days, and 3 days. Whenever he asked about it, she would brush it off, saying it was nothing. Now, thinking back, wasn't the day she disappeared precisely the last day of her countdown? James didn't want to believe it, but the scales in his heart had already tipped toward Mary's words. Yet she wasn't satisfied and continued to stoke the flames. If not, then think about it yourselves. Over the past 3 years, haven't you practically dug up every inch of that villa? How could a severely injured 25-year-old woman escape in just 3 minutes without being caught on any camera or leaving a single trace? How did she even get the footage of me framing and beating her? Isn't it obvious that the system helped her with all of it? She sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. It's laughable, really. I fought over someone who never even cared about you two. Someone who doesn't even belong to our world. You two deluded yourselves into thinking she was devoted to you, and because of that, I ended up like this. Ha ha. Mary laughed maniacally as James and Henry left the prison visitation room, their faces vacant and dazed. Their unsteady steps wavered as they made their way from the prison to the car. In just a few short steps, they nearly stumbled several times, saved only by the ever-present bodyguards at their sides, ensuring they didn't embarrass themselves in the crowded surroundings. Upon returning to the Ha family villa, James locked himself in his room and refused to see anyone, not even Henry. Married to Olivia for 5 years, it never crossed his mind that she might not love him. He had always assumed her love for him was so immense that it extended to everyone and everything connected to him, his son and even Mary, whom she treated with kindness. It was this belief that allowed him to dismiss her warmth and endure her indifference to the disdain and ridicule of his friends. So even when he and Mary rekindled their old relationship and brazenly brought her back to the villa, Olivia remained indifferent. Was it simply because she didn't love him and, therefore, didn't care? Suddenly, he felt an intense envy for the people in that photo, those who were deeply loved by her. Perhaps, after their tragic car accident that left them in a vegetative state, she had crossed over to this strange world, married a complete stranger, and cared for another father and son pair for 5 years, all just to bring those two back to life. James initially thought he owed Olivia and wanted to make amends. Even though he couldn't find her after endless searching, he refused to give up. He believed it was an obsession, but now he realized it wasn't. It wasn't a sense of debt, nor was it an obsession, it was love. Somewhere along the way, he had fallen for her without even realizing it. He simply refused to admit it, to acknowledge that he had fallen in love with a woman whom his friends had once mockingly called a clingy follower. Olivia was so kind, yet he was too cowardly to admit his feelings for her. Even when Mary wanted to take her away, he lacked the courage to firmly hold her back. If he had realized his love for her earlier, would their story have ended differently? When she left, could she have felt even a moment's reluctance for him and Henry? Unfortunately, in this world, there's no such thing as what if. In another room, Henry searched every corner of the villa, only to feel disheartened upon realizing that there was no trace of Olivia left. Not even a single object remained that could evoke her memory. Humans often only learn to cherish things after losing them. When she was still by his side, the boy took her for granted, knowing that no matter what, she would never get angry at him. She would always indulge him, allowing him to hurt her carelessly and disrespect her. Now, upon learning that she had another child and that he would never see her again, a hollow emptiness suddenly settled in his heart, as if he had lost his most cherished toy. Henry recalled the 2 instances when he caught her burning her belongings. Thinking back now, perhaps she had already been contemplating leaving at that time. If he had noticed that something was wrong and tried to intervene, could things have turned out differently? Would she have stayed? Would she have at least left him with a sliver of hope? Regretfully, back then, he dismissed her actions with a terrible attitude, cruelly remarking that it was all junk anyway, and that she might as well burn everything she owned. Children's emotions come quickly and are harder to suppress compared to adults. Henry could only lean against the door of the room where Olivia once stayed, hugging his knees and sobbing uncontrollably. From now on, he would no longer have a mother. The villa's staff, unaware of what had happened, could only observe the two masters who had returned. One locked himself in his room, with his only interaction being requests for alcohol to be brought in. The other rushed to the room of the Ms. and G mistress, crying inconsolably after 3 long years. No matter how much they tried to comfort him, he refused to open the door or stop crying, leaving them helpless and forced to walk away. As night fell, the father and son succumbed to their exhaustion. One had drunk so much that he passed out, while the other cried until he was completely drained, eventually falling asleep leaning against the door of her room. The villa finally returned to silence. That night, James and Henry encountered each other in a dream. In an endless blank white space, both appeared confused and lost. Despite usually being composed and mature for his age, Henry instinctively moved closer to James in this strange and unfamiliar place. James vaguely sensed something unusual in this place. After a moment of confusion, he instinctively pulled Henry behind him, vigilantly observing their surroundings. At that moment, a golden light suddenly appeared. After a few flickers, it stabilized completely in front of them. System 1107 received a strong wish, successfully connected with a host. Hello, dear hosts. I am System 1107. It is a pleasure to serve the host. Completing the tasks issued by the system will grant the opportunity to fulfill a wish. Do you too wish to bind? The system promised to fulfill their wishes. The event was so surreal that James and Henry exchanged looks, feeling as though they were dreaming. Remembering their last conversation with Mary, they unconsciously pinched themselves hard, but there was no sensation. Henry stared blankly as his usually composed and emotionless father pinched his own left arm. Afterward, a clear look of disappointment appeared on James's face, mirroring the boy's own feelings of letdown. So it really is just a dream, he thought to himself. The system, perceiving their thoughts in an instant, explained, "This is not a dream. The reason you feel no pain is that only souls can enter the system space. Pain is only felt if the soul is damaged. However, since soul damage is irreparable, it is strongly discouraged to test this." Those final words completely extinguished James's fleeting idea of trying. He hadn't reunited with Olivia yet. How could he risk irreversible harm? With that thought, he tightened his grip on Henriette's hand and looked up at the golden sphere of light. "Can you really help us fulfill our wish?" he asked. "Anything at all?" James asked in rapid succession. "Even going to another world, meeting someone I want to meet? Is that possible?" His barrage of questions stirred a surge of hope within Henry. For the past 3 years, ever since learning of the hardships Olivia had endured, and later discovering that her presence in their lives had another purpose, he had constantly thought about seeing her again, just once. Now, suddenly told it might be possible to reunite with her, he was filled with overwhelming excitement. Yet, at the same time, a fear lingered in his heart that it might all just be an impossible dream. That's right. As long as you complete the task assigned by the system, you will have the opportunity to fulfill your wish. Given the unique wish of the host, there are currently 2 options. The first is to choose to accompany the system, randomly entering a world to accompany the target for a 5-year strategy, during which you cannot refuse any request from the target. After completing the mission, you will receive a reward to fulfill your wish. The second option is to choose the system to distribute assets to a designated world. Choose a designated target for the strategy, and buy 9 parts of the assets obtained in the world. The task will be transferred to the name of the target through any form. After choosing to enter the task world, you will not be able to return to the original world. The 2 options correspond to 2 paths. James and Henry looked at each other without hesitation and spoke the same answer. "I choose the second option." The world no longer held any attachment for them. As long as they could stay by Olivia's side forever, what did it matter to transfer 9 parts of their assets to her? It was something they owed her and needed to make up for. As for the system companion, having to obey someone else for 5 years, they couldn't wait a second longer. The golden light sphere bounced up and down, seemingly nodding. In the next moment, the electronic mechanical sound echoed. "Mission accepted successfully. The world passage is being connected." With the sound echoing, James and Henry were momentarily stunned and quickly lost consciousness. When they woke up, the scene before them had changed. The ceiling was pure white, and the strong smell of disinfectant was everywhere, indicating that they were in a hospital. Groggily opening their eyes, they saw a nurse busy changing their foredrip. Hearing the noise, the nurse turned her head and smiled habitually. In the third year after returning to the original world, I suddenly received a call from an unknown number. At that time, I was at the rehabilitation center of Beijing Central Hospital with William Wilson and Ethan Wilson doing physical therapy. They had woken up from a vegetative state for 3 years, but the long coma and the injuries from the car accident still required rehabilitation in order to gradually recover. At that moment, the phone rang. "Hello, may I ask if this is Ms. Olivia?" I picked up the phone, and a strange female voice spoke. After receiving my confirmation, she continued, "This is the inpatient department of Beijing Central Hospital. There are 2 patients who say they are your friends. Would you be able to come over?" 2 patients. I was a bit puzzled, but thinking it was not far, I agreed. All right. After hanging up, I told William and Ethan, who were doing physical therapy for an hour, that I was going to the inpatient department. The inpatient department was on the 5th floor, opposite the rehabilitation center. I took the elevator up, and in front of me was the nurse's desk. After they asked for the specific room number, I went into the cramped patient room. The green curtains separated several beds, with only the curtain between 2 beds left open. It was clear that the 2 patients were looking for me. I stepped forward, but when I saw the 2 people on the hospital beds, I was immediately stunned. James, Henry, weren't they from the Ms. Ion world? How could they be here, and why did they look so miserable? In that world, they had billions of dollars in assets and could command the winds and the rain. Why were they in such a miserable place? When James and Henry saw me, their eyes suddenly reddened. "Olivia, we've missed you so much. Why did you go through all this trouble to find me?" After a brief moment of surprise, I quickly regained my composure and looked at them as though they were strangers. This look made their hearts ache. Henry immediately jumped off the bed and tightly hugged my legs. "Mom, Dad and I know we've wronged you. Can you forgive us? I didn't understand things before. I took advantage of you because you spoiled me and intentionally bullied you, but now I've really become good." In just a few short words, his eyes were filled with tears, and with his delicate and adorable features, he looked so pitiful. James couldn't bear to hug me and cry like his son did, so he could only silently feel envious, pursing his lips before awkwardly speaking. "Olivia, your dad and I have been looking for you for 3 years. I misunderstood you so much before. I allowed Mary to hurt you many times, but after I learned the truth, I made her pay the price and even had her thrown in jail. Olivia, your dad and I know we were wrong. You can punish us however you want. Just don't leave us, please." The once cold, ruthless, and decisive man, who always maintained his arrogant demeanor in front of me, this billionaire James, now, after meeting the one he had longed for 3 years, finally bowed his head and pleaded for a bit of compassion for me. Those years, I had completely followed them, and people said I loved them to the point of living and dying for them. Facing their earnest pleas, my heart remained undisturbed. The patient in the next bed heard the noise and pulled the curtain to peek. When they saw the awkward expressions of James and Henry, they were about to silently mutter, "She's such a heartless woman, she can even abandon her husband and child." But then they heard my voice. "I do indeed have a husband and a son, but it's not you, Mr. Anderson. We are just ordinary friends who have met a few times. If you just want to stay here, you don't need to drag me into this. If my husband and son see this, they will get jealous." Without any hesitation, I pushed Henry off my legs, and after saying these words, I turned and left the hospital room, leaving the entire room in curiosity. Some people openly watched the drama, while others secretly glanced at them. It was winter, and snowflakes were falling gently from the sky. I stopped in the hallway, watching the snowflakes float down, extending my hand to catch one. The cold sensation briefly lingered in my palm before disappearing, eventually turning into a small droplet of water. 3 years had passed, and I thought I had forgotten about traveling to the Ms. Ion world and all the experiences that came with it. Now, the appearance of James and Henry suddenly brought back memories that I had buried for so long. I suddenly remembered the day I completed the Ms. Ion and the overly mystical system. When I woke up again, I found myself back in the familiar room. In my dazed state, I thought it was just a dream, a very vivid one. But I had crossed over, and the system could bring me back to the time 5 years ago when I first left. However, all the injuries I suffered in the Ms. Ion world couldn't be avoided. As I crossed back, the large and small wounds on my body were still untreated, slowly bleeding out bit by bit. There was a medicine box in the villa, but I didn't have the strength to get up, so how could I take the box of medicine myself, let alone apply the medicine? The housekeeper could get the box for me and could help me apply the medicine, but I couldn't explain the origin of these injuries. Fortunately, the system hadn't fully left after bringing me back. Seeing my dilemma, the system also remembered that I had been injured so badly because of completing the Ms. Ion and took the initiative to heal my wounds. The golden light from the system was absorbed into my body, and I quickly felt a sense of comfort spread through me. I was amazed as I raised my hand. Just moments ago, I could see the skin peeling off my palm, but now it had restored to its original state. It even felt softer than before, unlike after taking care of James and Henry for 5 long years. It felt as if I had returned to before the time travel, when I was loved and cherished by William and Ethan, with my fingers untainted by water. The moment my body fully recovered, my phone rang. I answered, and on the other end was the overjoyed voice of the caretaker, "Madam, Mr. Wilson and your son have woken up." I immediately hung up the phone, hastily calling the driver to take me to the Beijing Central Hospital. The 30-minute drive was shortened to just 15 minutes. When the elevator stopped on the 5th floor, I could no longer wait and ran straight to the stairs. After catching my breath and reaching the patient's room, I opened the door. The people inside immediately turned their attention toward me. In the midday sunlight, William's delicate face still bore a slight pallor, the lingering color of someone just recovering from illness. Lying bedridden for a year had made his once tall and slender figure slightly frail. His lips were pale, and he forced a faint smile. His eyes, upon seeing me, couldn't look away. Ethan, who was usually obedient and calm, was held by William in his arms. Tears were still in his eyes, his face full of pity, having just stopped crying. Hearing the door open, his little head immediately turned. When he saw me, he clapped his hands and told his father to let go of him. He then hurried over, and when I squatted down with my arms wide open, he dashed into my embrace. "Mom, I'm glad you're okay." After a year of being in a vegetative state due to a car accident, Ethan, only 5 years old, had passed through the gates of death but still couldn't calm himself as William had. When the car accident happened, they were in the same vehicle. Both father and son were severely injured. Naturally, they were worried about me, and despite their protection, I couldn't avoid being hurt. They were afraid that, from now on, they would have to be separated from me, and, even worse, that father and son would leave before me, leaving me all alone. I held Ethan tightly in my arms, and tears as big as beads rolled down from the corners of my eyes. Before they could fall, a large hand gently wiped them away from the striped patient gown on his shoulder. I looked up, my vision blurred by tears, and wanted to speak, but the sorrow and frustration in my throat made me choke up. Tears fell again. William didn't seem bothered at all. The tears on my face were wiped away, and a gentle kiss fell on my cheek. He opened his arms and embraced both of us, speaking softly to comfort me. "I'm sorry for the time that Ethan and I made you worry. It won't happen again. Don't cry anymore. If you do, you'll become a kitten with wet fur." Ethan, in a small hand, kept patting my back until my mood finally calmed down. The nurse came to check the room and, seeing us like this, smiled and offered a few comforting words. It's a good thing that the patients have regained consciousness. Both of them coming back from a vegetative state at the same time is like 2 miracles happening together. With such good fortune, I believe Mr. Wilson and young Mr. Wilson will be very healthy in the future. When it was just William and Ethan, I didn't feel anything, but now that there were others here, I finally felt a little embarrassed. I quickly wiped my face, stood up, and smiled awkwardly. How could it not be a miracle? Originally, I thought I could only leave quietly like that, and yet I miraculously encountered the system. All I had to do was endure 5 years of hardship to exchange my life for theirs. I spoke too loudly, but waking up didn't mean I was fully healed. The many consequences from the car accident still needed time for rehabilitation to gradually reach the best possible state. Fortunately, with the help of the system, their recovery process was very smooth. Mom, wife, the two calls pulled me out of my memories. I turned around and saw William and Ethan standing under the eaves on the other side, their eyes full of love and gentleness. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, carrying snowflakes towards them, which finally landed on their hair and shoulders. I stepped through the snow and wind, standing opposite them. Under the eaves, only a few steps, and my head was already covered with snow. Mom and Dad's hair is already gray. Is this what the old people call gray hair and long teeth? William smiled and nodded, then brushed the snow off me, adjusting my scarf. He handed the umbrella to Ethan, who, with one hand carrying the little one, held my hand with the other. Let's go home. Yes, let's go home. Our 10 fingers interlocked, and Ethan in my arms had to use both hands to keep the umbrella over all 3 of us. His voice was filled with joy and happiness. Let's go home. Behind them, James and Henry watched the harmonious and affectionate interaction of the 3-person family. Their eyes were red, their throats choked with emotion. They couldn't stop themselves from chasing after us, hoping to plead with me to soften my heart and come back to them. But at that moment, they could no longer follow us. Dad, will Mom never come back to be my mom again? Henry's eyes were red, looking towards Olivia, William, and Ethan as they left. His voice was choked, almost crying. The little boy sought an answer, a denial, but James only shook his head and said nothing. No one knew what he wanted to say. Was it that I no longer needed them, or that I would never look back? Golden lights shimmer in front of them as the electronic machine voice announced, their first task after arriving in this world. Please, the host, quickly find a job, arrange the enrollment plan. Their future will proceed in an orderly manner according to the system's plan. Study, work, and acquire abundant wealth, but the wealth will never belong to them. The next time Olivia encountered the 2 father and son, James and Henry, was at the school. Ethan's homeroom teacher called me, saying that my son had gotten into a fight at school and asking me to come resolve it. I hung up the phone and hurried to the school, feeling very confused. After all, Ethan was always obedient and had never been involved in any fights with his classmates. When I arrived at the school, I saw another child with a bruised face, still filled with anger. I had a vague suspicion, and sure enough, when Henry saw me, his angry expression immediately faded. Mom, I didn't bully my classmate. There were no injuries on Ethan, but he appeared to have suffered great frustration. He pointed at Henry, who was standing across from him, and said, he started first and said that Mom is his mom, not mine. Henry truly hadn't expected that Ethan's mother would turn out to be Olivia. After all, he had only encountered Ethan twice, once 3 years ago when he saw a photo, and once a month ago. The first time, he didn't remember much, and the second time, he hadn't clearly seen the other child's face. This fight had only started because he instinctively blurted out, upon seeing a photo of Olivia, that she was his mother. Ethan had immediately punched him hard in response. Naturally, Henry wasn't willing to back down and tried to fight back, but he couldn't land a hit on Ethan. He had planned to wait for James to come to his aid. Despite taking several punches, he hadn't shed a tear. But when he saw Olivia rushing toward Ethan, his eyes instantly turned red. Mom, he cried, his voice trembling as he looked at Olivia gently comforting someone else, his heart filled with grievance. It shouldn't be like this. Clearly, in the past, she treated him very well. Even if it was because of the 5 years together for the Ms. Ion, how could she just forget so easily? Ethan, hearing the child's pitiful call for Mom, glared at him without hesitation and said, "This is my mom. You don't have a mom, so why do you want to take mine?" The teacher was a little embarrassed, looking at me, unsure of the relationship between them, and didn't dare to intervene. They had never encountered a child calling another student's mother Mom before. And yet, the other child ended up arguing, so much so that it even led to a fight over this matter. Mom will only be your mom, not someone else's mom. I didn't even look at Henry. First, I patted Ethan's back to calm him down, but there was a hint of disapproval in my eyes. Ethan, but you're not the type to be hot-headed. Can you tell me why you hit your classmate? Ethan pouted. Actually, he didn't really know why. It was just that when he saw Henry, instinctively, he felt some aversion and dislike toward him. Hearing him call Olivia Mom, I couldn't help but feel frustrated, and I couldn't stop it. But seeing my brows furrowed, the boy let out a long sigh, raised his hand to rub the wrinkle between his brows. Mom, I know fighting is wrong. I won't do it again. Both of us ignored Henry, treating him like he was invisible. James arrived just then. Henry was very smart, having finished elementary school curriculum a long time ago. Since he was in their original world, he had simply chosen an environment that seemed good. However, he hadn't expected to run into Olivia here. The boy instinctively wanted to approach her, but when he met her wary gaze, he stepped back. Sir, please take good care of your son. I know he's been without a mother since he was small, which is very unfortunate, but my son doesn't like others calling me Mom without permission. The sorrow in James's eyes seemed on the verge of spilling out. He opened his mouth to explain, but ultimately couldn't say anything, only lowering his head and apologizing. Sorry, I will discipline my son properly. Henry widened his eyes in disbelief. He couldn't believe James had said that, but she is his mother. Why does she need to correct herself? James, sighing deeply, patted the boy's head, not offering an explanation. They had been in this world for a month. During this time, James had often recalled the past between them. No matter what Olivia's purpose had been when approaching him, during those 5 years, she had never wronged him. It was they who had wronged her, so it was only natural for her to blame them now. However, James also believed that as long as they were sincere, Olivia would eventually accept them. They couldn't be her husband, but that didn't matter. If one day she softened toward Henry, they would be able to move forward. So after apologizing, he took his son out of the office and patiently reassured him. It's okay, when we came to this world, didn't we prepare ourselves for the fact that Olivia wouldn't accept us? Right now, what you need to do is to pretend to be pitiful so she can see how much you're suffering, until she's willing to accept you. She is a mother, and if she sees the child she once cared for so much suffering, she won't be able to ignore Henry. On the other hand, Olivia didn't know what was going through their minds. If she knew, she would probably just sneer. The reason she approached them in the first place was because she wanted to revive William and Ethan. Based solely on the 5 years they spent living together, there was basically no emotional bond between them. Day by day, it quickly became the eve of the new year. The Wilson family was filled with joy, and the servants had the day off. The lights were brightly lit throughout the night, covering the entire mansion. In the kitchen, I followed behind William, watching him carry a mass of dough for making steamed buns, a suggestion I had made. When I was at the family to take care of Henry, I had forced myself to learn many cooking skills, and I had honed them to the level of a 5-star chef. However, since returning to this world, I haven't had the opportunity to cook myself. Normally, it's either the servants or William who handles the preparation. This time, with the servants on leave, I planned to make the food myself. But in the end, most of the work was still taken on by William and Ethan. While they were joking and recording a video, the doorbell suddenly rang. The three of them looked at each other with some confusion, wondering who could be at the door at this time. In the end, they all went together to open the door, and James and Henry were standing outside. When Ethan saw them, he pouted and said, "What are you two doing here? Your tone is so rude." William gave him a light slap on the back of the head, scolding him affectionately, but it was clear he was just being polite, not actually scolding the boy. The boy huffed slightly and hugged his father's leg, not wanting to look at him. It was a little funny, so I paused for a moment before shifting the topic to the two people outside. Those two were James and Henry, father and son. They ignored the gazes of everyone else and looked directly at me. "Olivia, can we talk privately?" "Sorry, sir, it's not really the right time to have a private conversation." I wiped the flour that was on my face, turning my face into a cute, flour-smeared mess. Unfortunately, the people standing next to me were not them. Seeing me refuse without any hesitation, James and Henrietta's faces turned pale, seemingly not expecting me to turn them down so bluntly. With bitterness in his heart but unable to bring himself to leave, Henry's eyes reddened, and he choked out in a trembling voice, "Mom, do you really not need Dad and me anymore?" Just as he was about to speak further, Ethan, in a furious voice, interrupted, blazing with anger. Henry, didn't you get enough of a beating last time? If you want a mom, go find your own. Stop clinging to mine, or else I swear, wherever I see you, I'll hit you." The sudden outburst startled both of them, and even William was taken aback. He couldn't understand why the usually well-behaved and obedient Ethan had suddenly become so fiery-tempered. The forceful, hostile words that threatened Henry left him speechless, unable to hold back a sob. Ethan gave him a disdainful glance, then looked at James and rolled his eyes. "You clingy little thing, if you've got something to say, say it quickly. If you've got gas, let it out. If there's nothing, then get lost." With that mom call, Ethan's attitude suddenly shifted. James didn't want to leave, but staring into the deadly gaze of the father and son, he could only grit his teeth and bring out something he had prepared long ago. He closed his eyes and tried to force a gentle, kind demeanor. "Olivia, Happy New Year." I lowered my head to look at the gift box, just about to decline when a flash of golden light suddenly appeared. It was just a system message, but it still recommended the host to accept it. No matter how the host uses it in the future, the system will not ask further. I froze for a moment, looking at the two people in front of me. The expressions of James and Henry remained unchanged, as if they didn't notice the conversation between me and the system. The system flashed again, explaining the system could choose its appearance target at will, and those who were not chosen, even if they were the host, couldn't see it. As for the system that revived my husband and son, I still trusted it. Since the system advised me to accept, I thought for a moment, and the words of refusal I was about to say were swallowed. I accepted the gift and said thank you. James and Henry thought their actions had worked, and a gleam of light immediately appeared in their eyes, no longer showing any signs of discouragement. "All right, the gift has been given. You two should leave now." William slightly narrowed his eyes, his voice full of impatience, showing no intention of hiding his wish to get rid of the guests. James and Henry didn't know why William, who had been silent all along, suddenly started to chase them away. But anyway, the gift had already been given. Although they felt a bit uncomfortable inside, they didn't dwell on it. This villa was so remote that they couldn't get a cab, and James and Henry could only walk out. Over the past few months, the two of them would often come to attract attention when I was alone, but it was mostly in vain. This was the first time I didn't refuse or deliberately distance myself from them. Thinking about it, perhaps they had been doing the right thing all along. At that moment, inside the Wilson residence, I casually threw the gift box in my hand onto the coffee table beside me, looking at the two men, one big and one small, in front of me. My gaze kept shifting between the two of them, pretending to ask seriously, "All right, tell me the truth. What exactly have you two been hiding from me?" Their hostile attitude toward Henry and James was too obvious, so obvious that it would be hard for me not to notice. William and Ethan exchanged glances for a moment, then started to laugh. I was so confused by their laughter that I didn't understand what was going on. I immediately became a little angry, slammed my hand on the coffee table, and my voice carried some frustration. Seeing that I was really angry, William quickly poured a glass of water and handed it to me. Ethan quickly patted my back with his small hand to comfort me, saying, "Mom, don't be angry. Both Dad and I will tell you the truth. Actually, it's nothing. It's just that recently, both William and Ethan have been having the same dream. In the dream, they were unconscious for not just 1 year, but saw, from a different perspective, everything I had done since they fell into a coma. I knelt in the operating room, praying to the heavens for them to live, knowing that they had become vegetative. I knelt and climbed 3,000 steps up to the most sacred Wanguang temple in Beijing, praying to the gods and Buddhas for their recovery. They felt heartache and regret, wishing they could suffer in my place. When they saw my blood-covered knees, they were filled with self-loathing. It was because of their incompetence that I had to go this far. William and Ethan looked at me, and in just a short year, they had tried every possible method but had no results. Until the system finally sent out a golden light and reached me, I had finally found a way to save them. The price to pay was 5 years of freedom and dignity. The two of them, who had always been pampered and never had to endure hardship, were the ones I had always cared for. To save them, I had traveled to another world, married someone else, and obeyed their every command, caring for them in every little detail. But in return, I was abandoned without hesitation when James's true lover returned. They didn't understand why someone would consider not getting a divorce as a favor and feel grateful to them. When they saw that I only had one more day to leave, they couldn't help but sigh in relief. But they saw James and Henry calmly entrust me to the cruel Mary. Finally, I was free. They had woken up. Finally, they could shelter me under their wings once again, allowing me to be free to do what I wanted. But these two men came rushing here, saying they wanted forgiveness. Based on what? When there was no love, they freely hurt me, and now when they regret it, they want to cling to me. Gritting their teeth, they apologized, saying, "Olivia, it's because we didn't protect you well." I listened as they told me everything I had gone through in these years. I had never cried while going through it all, but at this moment, my eyes suddenly welled up with tears. The suppressed frustration surged, and I tightly hugged them, tears truly soaking their clothes. That's right, it was all because of them. Why did they only wake up now? On the other side of Beijing, in a cramped, shabby rented house, since most of their assets had been given to me, James and Henry had been living a very difficult life. After all, even the medical expenses when they woke up had to be borrowed temporarily from the system and would need to be repaid on time. Luckily, in his previous life, he was the richest person, very sharp in business. In just a few months, he used the remaining balance to pay off all the debts. At this moment, the two of them were huddled on a dirty sofa, calculating when they could replace it while staring at the screen in front of them. And on the screen was the scene of me hugging William and Ethan in the Wilson family's villa. Indeed, when they became part of the situation, they always felt that as long as they treated me well, I would always return to them. But only now did they realize it wasn't that simple. First of all, the feelings between me and William and Ethan are absolutely not something James had ever allowed me to compare to. Just like how I could kneel to heaven and earth for William and Ethan, pray to the gods and Buddha, willing to accept the Ms. Ion for them, follow them with absolute obedience, enduring any injustice without giving up. But after 5 years, when the mission ended, I immediately left the world of the Ms. Ion without hesitation. Just like how I would express my frustration in front of William and Ethan, crying loudly, but in front of them, I acted like a machine that never grew tired. I would also act spoiled towards them, and William and Ethan would say it was all their fault, but they never truly got angry at them. But the gifts they sent to me, I would politely accept and then carelessly toss aside. James and Henry could never compare to William and Ethan in my heart. They were disheartened when they realized this truth, but they couldn't help but scold themselves with a serves them right, just like I had accompanied Ethan and Henry for 5 years. During those 5 years, if Henry had a little respect for me, treated me like a mother, instead of after I had worked hard to raise it for 5 years, for the return of Mary, refusing to call me Mom, and even saying in front of me, "I only have one mother," perhaps after they both arrived in this world, I wouldn't treat them so harshly, but things had reached this point. They had no way out anymore. Henry no longer had a mother. From this moment, or perhaps earlier, since it truly sympathized with the words of James's friends, thinking that I was just a nanny who could take care of them very well, and no longer had a mother. The screen slowly darkened. Henry couldn't hold back anymore and rushed into James's arms, crying uncontrollably. After I finished crying, I finally remembered the gift box the system told me to accept. My eyes were still swollen and red, so I curiously picked up the gift box. Opening it, the box wasn't big, and inside there was only a savings book and a piece of paper. The paper read, "William and Henry have wronged you. Consider this as a compensation from us to you." As long as we are alive, we will continue to deposit money into this savings account, and we hope you won't mind the amount. I opened the savings book and glanced at the balance inside. It was a little over 10,000. It seemed that the two of them were really not doing well right now. That night, I still made dumplings by hand. I always thought that no matter what, no matter how many meals I had made for James and Henry, there was no reason my real family had never had food made by me. Eating to their fill was the moment to usher in the new year. When children still had plenty of energy, they could cause so much trouble that no one could sleep. But when the sleepiness came, they would fall asleep faster than anyone else. Ethan initially felt very unfamiliar with the situation. After all, it was rare for him to be allowed to stay up past his usual bedtime. After a while, he kept asking to play, and it was the first time I saw him fully show his playful side like that. Usually, he acted like an old man, always proper, polite, and respectful toward William. Truly, they seemed to be cut from the same cloth, just that the clock hands had barely moved. By midnight, Ethan was wide awake, as though his spring was suddenly unwound. He was so tired that his little head kept nodding off, losing interest in everything. When I gently picked him up and placed him back in bed, he mumbled, "Mom, I want to celebrate the new year with you." I smiled softly, kissed his forehead, and then turned to leave the room. However, as I closed the door behind him, I backed up and collided with a warm embrace. At first, I was startled. After I regained my composure, I angrily turned around and slapped his arm, saying, "What are you doing, sneaking up behind me without a sound? You scared me to death." I muttered as I looked up, and my gaze met his deep, dark eyes. His hand on my waist tightened instinctively, making him seem like a cold, handsome CEO. But at that moment, he almost transformed into a puppy, feeling a bit aggrieved. He wanted me to rest, put his chin on the top of my head, nuzzling into my soft hair, before he spoke. I didn't cooperate and pretended to be clueless, teasing him a little. A playful smile flashed in my eyes. The next moment, his handsome face filled my vision. Instinctively, I closed my eyes. A soft laugh echoed from above my head, and I laughed so hard that my ears turned bright red. Just as I was about to open my eyes and protest, I felt a warm, damp sensation on the corner of my eye. The next afternoon, after we had just finished eating, I went for a walk with William and Ethan in a nearby park to burn off the food. Suddenly, James and Henry blocked our way. It had only been one night, but their appearance had changed drastically since we last saw them. Despite the cold, indifferent expressions of the two men, James and Henry's eyes were fixed firmly on me. Perhaps they were afraid of being kicked out. After blocking our path, the two of them quickly spoke. "Olivia, can we talk privately?" Just this once, I promise that after this, we will never appear before you again." It seemed they really wanted the chance to talk, and James even gambled all future chances for this one moment. Actually, I really wanted to call my bodyguards, but then I thought better of it. Considering how easily they could always find me, it was definitely related to the system. If the system was involved, then ordinary bodyguards probably couldn't stop them. Using this opportunity once to secure lasting peace wasn't a bad trade. I turned back and smiled at William and Ethan. "Wait for me a moment, I'll be back soon." "All right." Although I really didn't want to be alone with James and Henry, I had already made up my mind, and of course they wouldn't stop me. The three of them didn't go too far, just casually choosing a stone table with a canopy. "If you have something to say it quickly." My voice was calm, neither happy, excited, annoyed, nor hateful. It was as if the two people in front of me were complete strangers, with no connection to me. James twitched his mouth, a bitter feeling spreading. His gaze described my features as though he wanted to carve my face into his mind, but he didn't dare delay too long, fearing to provoke my displeasure. He could only quickly speak up. "Olivia, do you really like them?" As for who them referred to, it didn't need to be said. I frowned at him, my gaze as if questioning the absurdity of his question. But he pursed his lips, showing a particularly stubborn attitude, determined to hear me say the answer myself. Of course, we were childhood friends. He had decided on me, and I had decided on him. Ethan was the child I carried for 10 months, respected me, loved me, and protected me. If I didn't love him, then who would I love? Should I love him and Henry? Am I a masochist? Why would I love someone who treated me like a nanny and never trusted me, who could easily give me away to someone else? I tilted my head with a look of genuine doubt in my eyes, and the two people in front of me blushed because of my counter-question. Yes, they had done so many unforgivable things. How could they dare to wish for happiness? Having seen it all, how could I possibly forgive them and return to them? Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Olivia. After a long silence, James and Henry both lowered their heads, their apologies as quiet as a mosquito's buzz. I shook my head. They had never experienced what I had gone through, so I had no intention of accepting their apology. Right? As for how they addressed me, if I remember correctly, I had already said that, Mr. Anderson. I hope I won't hear that again next time. You both call me Mom and Olivia, but I only have Ethan as my son. Our relationship is not close enough to call each other by such intimate names. If there's nothing else, I'll leave. After saying this, I stood up and walked out of the pavilion. Hearing my next words, James and Henry suddenly widened their eyes and both stood up, following me. As I stood up, startled, they called out to me, "Stop, wait." My steps halted, and I turned to look at them. What else is there? Mom, really? Can't you give us any chance? Henry's eyes were red, the corners of his mouth drooping in a pitiful manner. James's voice was trembling, his eyes staring intently at me, trying to find a trace of anger in my eyes. Olivia, do you really have to be so heartless, cutting off all relations? Hearing them, I raised my eyebrows and let out a faint laugh. Heartless? Didn't I already say that if you too went through what I have, I would naturally forgive you? 3 years have passed, and haven't you two failed to do that yet? After saying that, I didn't wait for James and Henriette's response. I directly walked out of the pavilion and headed toward William and Ethan, who'd been waiting outside. Mom, has it finished? Seeing me walk out, Ethan quickly stepped forward and grabbed my right hand. I nodded. William also naturally stepped forward and took my left hand. No one mentioned the two father and son behind us. The three of us walked side by side, and suddenly small snowflakes began to fall from the sky. Each snowflake landed on our shoulders, creating a beautiful and romantic scene. After that, I truly never met the two of them again. The last news I heard about them was 3 years later, and indeed he was very capable, having built a business empire. But on that very day, the two of them had a car accident while on a business trip. 3 months later, a lawyer came to see me with a will, leaving all the assets under the names of James and Henry to me. I accepted the inheritance, but I didn't keep it for myself. Instead, I found a reliable charity fund and donated the entire amount. From that day on, there were no more James and Henry in this world. Our story ends here. Stay tuned for what's coming next. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the Adventure Stories audio channel.